Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Marla and I'm the owner and creator behind From Rust to Roses Vintage. This week I'm coming to you from sunny Southern California. In the video I will show you how I used many of the new holiday release items from IOD, as well as some items I brought with me and items that I have thrifted while I've been here in California. Please join me. For project 1 I'm using the new Bibelots 2 ornament mold by IOD. It's part of the 2025 holiday release. And I decided to use casting resin rather than clay because I want the ornaments to be sturdy and to hold up over time. You mix the casting resin on a 1-to-1 ratio, 1 part A and 1 part B. I mixed up what I thought was quite a bit. I should have paid attention to the little measurements that are provided on the mold. But I ended up with only enough for 4 molds, and so I had to mix up a little more to make that 5th mold. Once the molds were set up, I got out 2 fusion mineral paint colors, one in French eggshell, and the other I believe is Upper Canada green, a very nice green color, and I gave the molds 2 coats of paint. While I waited for the paint to dry, I got out the new transfer books and started looking through them to find transfers small enough to fit on the ornaments. There were so many beautiful options to pick from in the 5 transfer books that it actually took me some time to decide on the ones that I was going to use for these ornaments. Once I had decided on the transfers, then I started applying them using the transfer stick that comes with each booklet. Because Fusion Mineral Paint has a built-in top coat, the transfers went on very easily. And then I used my fingers to burnish them down, making sure that the transfers were completely adhered to the ornament. When I had finished with all of the transfers, I gave each ornament a coat of DIY liquid patina. It's important that you seal your transfers. After the top coat had dried, I got out my Fusion Mineral Paint in copper and started adding some embellishment to the ornaments. I decided to paint all of the hanger parts of the ornaments with the copper. I went around each of them along the edges for some more dimension, and then I painted the back of each ornament in copper. In order to give the ornaments a more vintage feel, I decided to use Pent Art's Fine Line Crackle. This is a 2-part crackle system. Part 1 you lay down, let it dry until it's just slightly tacky, and then you put on part 2 and let it dry completely.
Jingle bells ringing in my ear. Jingle bell, a sound that's oh so dear. Frosty the snowman is all around town. Watch out for reindeers are falling down. We stay up waiting for Santa tonight.
Once the second part of the crackle system has dried completely, you can then go over it with a dark wax or antiquing glaze. Just make sure that you don't use anything that is water-based because it will ruin the shine that you get from the crackle medium. I did find that some of my cracking was faint, and so I actually had to use my finger to rub it down in, but it worked out great, and when I buffed off the excess, it looked like the surface of the ornaments had crazed over time. I also added a little bit of Debbie's DIY Decrepit Dust to enhance the cracks just a little more. I finished up the ornaments with a cream satin ribbon and then decided to take some watered down white paint and give them each a little splatter of paint. It almost looks like snow. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments. I love the way they turned out. For project 2, I had an old Barnwood frame I had thrifted that I had been wanting to do something with for a long time. So I started out with an artist canvas that I had in my stash, and then I decided to try the new cracking paste by Pentart. I used a silicone popsicle stick to spread it out on the canvas. I have never used this before, so I was very curious as to how well it would crack and how much that cracking would show through a top layer of paint. After the cracking paste had dried, I took out some alchemy paint in the color birch and went over it with a chip brush. I didn't want a solid coat. I did want some of the black cracking paste to show through, but I needed enough of the alchemy for the paint inlay I was about to put on it. After the chalk paint dried, I gave it a coat of DIY liquid patina and then left it to dry a second time. After it had dried the second time, I got out the liquid patina again, and this time I was going to use it as the base for a transfer. I took a transfer out of the new IOD transfer book called The 12th Night. Apparently I didn't have my camera recording when I put the first part of the paint inlay down, those two deer, but I just sprayed the back of them, laid them in the liquid patina, and then dabbed off the excess water. I then do the same thing with the second part of the paint inlay. Once I have it down and all smoothed out, I spray it again with water and then dab off the excess. After that, I decide to add some embellishments along the side. The nice thing about the paint inlays is you can cut them apart and use them any way you like. You don't have to use them the way they're laid out on the sheet. Once the paint inlays were dry, I sprayed them with water, dabbed off the excess, and then waited about 30 seconds before peeling them off. When I was done with the transfer, I set it aside and then turned my attention to the frame. I had thought about painting it, but I really did like the old Barnwood look that it had, and so I decided instead that I was going to wax it with black wax. However, you can see here that I'm using the clear wax first. That way, if I get too much black wax or I don't like the intensity of it, the layer of clear wax that's on there will make it much easier to remove any excess dark wax. I chose not to stay with the brown color just because the tones in the transfer were mostly black and gray. I thought it would look a lot better if it leaned towards black versus that warm brown. I'm so glad I didn't paint the frame. I hope you love the finished product as much as I do. When I was out thrifting here in LA, I came across this barrel at the Goodwill. It was something that was made up for 4th of July, but because it was red, I thought it would be great for Christmas. It took me about 15 or 20 minutes to soak and get that sticker off of the front. But once I got it off, I mixed up some Sweet Pickens milk paint in the color Flour Sack. Decided I was going to go over the red with the milk paint.
Merry Christmas, baby.
Once I was finished applying the milk paint, I got out my heat gun and started to dry it, not only to speed up the project, but to see if I could get a little bit of crackle in the paint, which ultimately I did.
Merry Christmas, honey. Yeah. The snowman's dusting off his hat.
After the milk paint had dried completely, I sanded it with some 220 grit sandpaper and then took out a cloth to wipe away the sanding dust before applying a coat of liquid patina to seal in the milk paint.
Happens when sleigh bells are ringing, when December ends, when the children are singing, yeah.
Once the liquid patina had dried, I picked out a paint inlay that I wanted to put on the front. I laid down another coat of liquid patina to use as my medium for the paint inlay. I spritzed it on the back and then put it down into the liquid patina, making sure that all parts of the inlay were touching the barrel.
Merry Christmas, baby.
Once I was sure the inlay was down in the patina, I spritzed it with water and then dabbed off the excess. Once the inlay had dried, I sprayed it with water again, waited about 30 seconds, and then removed it. I then decided I wanted to add some transfers to the sides of the barrel. So I went through some of the transfers from the books and finally settled on the Christmas tree with the deer. It seemed very fitting for an old wooden barrel like this one. And then I chose a small Santa to put on the other side. I also used some holly trim to go around the bottom of the barrel on the back side.
Something happens when something that happens when December ends.
Transfers are usually pretty easy to put down, even on rough surfaces like this barrel. You just have to take your time, and as you're lifting the transfer, if you notice any of it coming up with the sheet, lay it back down and rub over it some more. In order to age the barrel, I got out my Fusion antiquing glaze and put a good coat of it all over the surface of the barrel including the transfers. I then took a soft cloth and wiped it back, adding more if I felt I wanted to darken certain areas. When I was done with the antiquing glaze, I got out my DIY decrepit dust. If you've seen my videos before, you know I love using that to age. And I went along the edge of the barrel on both the top and the bottom. The antiquing glaze was still wet enough in some areas for it to stick. And if it wasn't wet enough, I just used what was left on my brush, laid some more antiquing glaze down, and then went over it with the decrepit dust. I absolutely love how this barrel turned out. It looks like it's been around for a long time, and I think it's one of the favorite projects of mine that I've done so far this year. You'll have to let me know what you think. For project number 4, I used this breadboard I thrifted on one of my recent thrift hauls. I started out by covering it with a layer of DIY's weathered wood. I wanted to be able to sand back whatever color I put on the surface and have some of that darkness show through. Once the paint had dried completely, I gave it a coat of DIY's liquid patina. It's a top coat that would help me seal in the brown paint so that whatever paint color I put on top of it, I could distress back and still have the brown showing underneath. After the liquid patina dried, I went over the top with 2 different colors. I used DIY's crinoline, which is an off-white color, and then Fusion Mineral Paint's Parchment, which is a white color. It might seem odd to use a clay paint mixed with an all-in-one paint, but it worked out fine and gave me some dimension instead of having just one solid color on top of the board. I let the paint dry for about 24 hours, and then I went in with my finger sander and started sanding around the edges. And just as I had hoped, you can see that the brown weathered wood is showing through as I sand off the top coats of paint. I'm not really sure what happened after this, but for some reason I didn't get the next steps videotaped. But I will show you what I used and explain to you what I did to get the final look. I chose the new IOD stamp called Holly and Pine. I wanted to stamp the pine and rose swags on the corners and then put the Christmas tree in the middle. It's a beautiful, beautiful stamp. I didn't have any green ink with me, and so I used a combination of DIY's Eden and Fusion Mineral Paints Upper Canada, and I mixed those paints on a sheet of cellophane. And I didn't mix them thoroughly, so there would be a little bit of color difference as I rolled it on. I used my IOD brayer to roll on the paint, and then I stamped the wood. Once I had it stamped and it dried, I distressed it by sanding over the paint, and then I put a layer of DIY liquid patina on top, and while the liquid patina was still damp, I put on DIY's decrepit dust around the edges to age it. Once all of that had dried, I gave it a final coat of Big Top. If you're wondering why I chose to use Big Top instead of liquid patina, it's because Big Top has a little bit more of a shine to it, and that's the look that I wanted. I love how this breadboard turned out. It was an easy flip, and it is simple and understated, and yet I feel like it really evokes the spirit of the holidays. For project 5, I took a frame that I had thrifted a long time ago and an 8x10 MDF panel that my husband had cut for me. I originally painted the panels white just so they would be ready for upcycling, but decided for this picture I wanted the background to be more of a cream color, maybe even pull in a color from the transfer I had chosen. The transfer had some yellow in it, and so I thought it might be interesting to add a little bit of the Alchemy Harvest paint to the Fusion Mineral Paint I was using in raw silk and get sort of a muted yellow. But you'll see later that I went back to just the Fusion raw silk because of what I did to the panel that I put the transfer on. Since I had decided to paint the frame just in raw silk, I had put some of the yellow mixture on my panel. But again, it was too plain, and so I decided I would do a whitewash of raw silk over the yellow, so I would have a more tonal background. I also did my brush strokes both vertically and horizontally to give it more the look of a canvas. This is one of the transfers out of the new transfer book. I believe it's called Clementine. It is full of amazing, amazing artwork. I love botanicals of any kind, and especially those that have a Victorian or vintage look to them. So I decided to use this one with the oranges or clementines on it, and I cut the transfer apart so that I could move things around and make sure that I got all of the transfer on my panel. Once I was finished putting the transfer down, I then gave my frame 3 coats of Fusion raw silk mineral paint. Doesn't usually take 3 coats, but I wanted to use 3 thin coats rather than 1 or 2 thicker ones. I then went back to the transfer panel. I had sprayed it with 1 coat of matte clear spray, and then I wanted to use some of the antiquing glaze, Fusion's antiquing glaze, to go around the edges and give it just a little bit of age. I didn't want it to be distressed or anything like that because the picture is just too beautiful, but I also didn't want it to look like it was brand new. I wanted it to look like maybe something that had been handed down from my grandmother to my mother and then to me. I also added some of the glaze and some of the decrepit dust to the frame, and then once I was happy with the way it looked, I put the panel inside the frame. You'll have to let me know what you think of the final result. If you've stayed through to the end, I sincerely want to thank you for watching my video. And if you haven't done so, please consider subscribing to my channel and giving me a thumbs up. I truly love making these creations and sharing them with you. And once again, if you live in the Las Vegas area, please stop by the Antique Mall of America and visit my booth for all of your IOD, Fusion mineral paint, and DIY clay paint needs.